My name is Johanna Wagstaffe. I'm a meteorologist and an earth scientist. Every day, I see the effects of climate change through my work, a relentless cycle of extreme weather, terrifying storms, deadly heat domes, wildfires, droughts. But I remain in awe of the natural world and how it finds ways to adapt. And that's what we explore on Planet Wonder.
It seems that signs of runaway climate change are everywhere this summer.
The climate time bomb is ticking.
It will be too late.
Act now or face irreversible consequences.
When it comes to climate change, sometimes it can sound all doom and gloom, like there's no hope. But I also know the science says it's not too late to turn things around. So what do you all think? Can we do it? So this has me wondering, is talking about climate change making it worse? To understand what can motivate us to take climate action, we need to dive deep into the human brain. What is going on inside the brain that leads us to feel compelled to achieve something? What fires up human motivation? Well, scientists have known for a long time about the importance of the chemical dopamine. Many of us know it as the pleasure chemical, but in fact, it mainly sparks motivation. Dopamine helps to generate both positive and negative motivation. It transmits signals in response to rewards, but also to stress or aversion. So, if we could figure out how to create the right messaging around climate change that would make our brain release positive dopamine, then maybe more people would take action. Now, this is where behavioral psychology comes in. One of the most common methods of stimulating dopamine is through external motivation. You know, I will work extra hours to make extra money. The other way is intrinsic motivation, the enjoyment from the experience of that goal itself. I love working on Planet Wonder because I'm energized by the whole experience. That's true, by the way. So can we use these approaches to rewire the brains of the whole planet to make people want to slash greenhouse gas emissions? Because clearly, the way we talk about climate change now is not motivating most people to change their behavior. A recent Gallup World Risk poll found global concern over climate change actually fell 1.5% last year. To learn more about the power of language and messaging about climate action, we met up with behavioral psychologist Jiaying Zhao, who goes by JZ, by the way. And what better place to start our journey than at Soaring Eagle Nature School? Basically, Planet Wonder goes to camp. Okay, JZ, is talking about climate change actually making it worse?
Yes. How we talk about climate change matters. The way we talk about climate change right now is unfortunately not great for engaging people on this topic, because the current narrative on climate change is about doom and gloom. We're heading toward the climate catastrophe. The framing right now is very negative, and this negativity makes us feel anxious, depressed, withdrawn. So we're actually not effectively engaging with the topic.
What's the alternative? I mean, how do we shift to a positive messaging while still staying true to the dire science?
I think the alternative messaging is positive. We have to make it positive. The approach I'm advocating for is the happy climate approach. It's basically telling people the things we can do in our lives that not only reduce emissions, but also make us feel happier as a result. I think that reframing can get more people into the conversation of climate change and get people to take actions on climate change.
I need to learn more about this. What climate change messages are you hearing lately?
We are getting to a tipping point, and if we don't make serious global concerted changes, that we are going to hit a point of no return.
What we hear in the news, climate change causing this weather, climate change causing that weather.
As Canadians, we have to take care of our wildlife, right? So it's kind of like if we live here, then we gotta take care of this place we live in.
I guess I'm concerned about the flooding the one that happened last year in Abbotsford. So I do think about that quite a bit.
I feel like lots of people are like, well, if this is happening, we can't really do much to fix it, and they just push it off for future generations.
It is a total reframing because as a scientist, for so long, it's been about trying to get people to understand how serious the situation is. And do you think that's where we went wrong in the messaging?
Yeah, I think the doom and gloom narrative is too heavy. It's paralyzing. It makes us retreat and disengage. So the kind of the behavioral impact is actually the opposite of what we hope people would do. And this is where we need to turn the narrative into a positive frame. The other narrative is asking people to sacrifice, to give up, to reduce, to cut back. Basically, it's telling us to, no, you gotta give up your life to fight climate change. Things like drive less, eat less meat, fly less, shop less, waste less. You know, that's the kind of the personal sacrifice frame. It's also not great for behavior change, because that frame makes us feel shameful and guilty. If you tell me, no, you gotta drive less and eat less meat, my response would be, oh, I feel terrible. You know, I feel bad for what I'm doing right now. And these negative emotions like shame and guilt are not, again, conducive to behavior change. So for so many reasons, we need to shift the narrative around and turn climate change to something that's positive for people.
Positive storytelling has the potential to change minds. Just ask a PhD candidate. Grace Nosek, show me your laboratory.
We just saw a new United Nations report underscoring once again that we desperately need political will for urgent climate action. But how do you build political will? It's actually stories. The stories we tell one another, the stories we read and share on social media, and especially the stories we consume in the news. What we actually need is grounded hope, a sense of agency, goals, a pathway, being able to see your fellow peers and citizens taking effective action on climate change in community as a collective. And what we also need to recognize is that these stories are not happening in a vacuum. I've spent the last 7 years studying how the fossil fuel industry has used so many different tactics to undermine political will through story. The other thing we really need to recognize is that our youth are disproportionately hearing these stories of apocalypse and doomism. We have this new study coming out in The Lancet showing that the youth in Canada and around the world are really being hit by this tidal wave of eco and climate anxiety. And we owe them stories of grounded hope for climate justice and climate action.
The words we use really, really do matter.
They do. Let me give you an example. Instead of saying drive less, we should say drive more people.
I see what you did there.
Why is that important? One, you're driving more people who would otherwise be driving by themselves. So you're saving the emissions by carpooling. Second, social connections. Hanging out with friends and family in the car actually can make you feel happier, because social interactions is the #1 predictor of happiness around the world.
And it doesn't make it sound like you're being told to not do something.
It's not to say don't drive or drive less. No, drive as much as you want, but drive other people with you.
Do you have any other examples of sort of that reframing of words?
Yeah, so instead of saying eat less meat, because that's a sacrificial frame, say eat more plants. Because plants are great for our body, our mind. It's plants, vegetables. Don't say don't eat meat, but yeah, eat meat, but make it a treat.
It's a treat. It's a special occasion.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So you can enjoy it more. So that's the kind of the principle of happiness is abundance reduces appreciation. Instead, we should make those, let's say, high emission items, foods or activities a treat.
This really applies to me. I need to reframe my nightly Toblerone. That idea of reframing language is something the City of Vancouver is working on when it comes to development. When an Indigenous approach is taken, it's not just about building, it's about centering the language around how the land used to be before colonization. Cory Douglas is doing just that.
Can you tell me more about your role as cultural advisor with the City of Vancouver for their sea level rise project?
I mean, if you look at the urban fabric of a city, nature is basically, it's not directly associated with any kind of urban fabric and or design. So what we wanted to do is ensure through our design analysis was reestablish that relationship between the Indigenous communities, being Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and repair that relationship between Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh and nature.
At the end of the day, do you hope that overall, everyone who works and plays on this unceded land will be using words like accommodate versus retreat?
And I think it really comes down to understanding and appreciating pre-contact history and those relationships even from Indigenous community to Indigenous community, and how complex those relationships were, how the land had actually supported the Indigenous people and how it isn't today. How can we, as an industry, understand and appreciate and repair that relationship? Indigenous engagement comes in various ways. Like, there are so many complex ways to engage an Indigenous community. We want the entire project to be injected with a cultural identity.
How does that apply both to individuals having conversations about this and sort of the messaging that we're getting?
The messaging matters as well. So not just the words we use, but the kind of messages we use. So one example is actually carbon tax is negative because nobody likes tax. So actually in a study done back in 2019, consumers like carbon offsets way more than carbon tax, even though it's effectively the same thing. So they prefer to fly or to purchase items with carbon offsets on it, and they are willing to pay more for it as opposed to paying carbon tax as a result. So for people who are concerned about climate change, yes, the environmental frame, the health frame is effective. But for conservative individuals, for people who are skeptical or are doubtful of the human contributions to climate change, that messaging doesn't work. Instead, we should use other kinds of messaging, like saying that climate change poses a national security threat. So messaging that resonates with conservative values on security, protecting our families, protecting our homes, and also making renewable energy, the climate actions as boosting economic and technological development. So those narratives or messages actually resonate a lot with conservatives. That will make them take actions and care about climate change more.